Do you feel like you are never good enough? Every single day you tell yourself, just be a little more perfect. When you scroll through social media and see others living their best lives, does it feel like only you are struggling with problems? If yes, then you are not alone. Perfectionism has become an epidemic in today's world, destroying millions of lives. You wake up thinking about the presentation that needs to be flawless. You spend hours crafting the perfect email. You avoid starting projects because the conditions are not perfect. You criticize yourself for tiny mistakes that nobody else even notices. This is not motivation. This is not high standards. This is perfectionism, and it is silently sabotaging your life. Perfectionism is not the friend of success. It is the enemy. Today we have brought you The Perfection Trap by Thomas Curran. This book will completely transform your understanding of perfectionism using decades of scientific research. Thomas Curran has studied over 30,000 people across different countries and cultures. His findings will shock you. Perfectionism is not helping you achieve more. It is making you achieve less, while destroying your mental health and relationships. In this video, you will discover exactly what perfectionism really is, how it develops in childhood, why it destroys performance rather than improving it, the devastating impact on mental health, and most importantly, scientifically proven methods to overcome it. This is not just theory. These are practical strategies you can implement immediately to start living a more authentic and successful life. Are you ready to break free from the perfection trap? Let's begin this life-changing journey. Chapter 1. The Perfectionism Epidemic. Shocking statistics. Over the past 3 decades, perfectionism has increased by 33% among young people. This is not a coincidence. This is a mental health crisis that nobody is talking about. Thomas Curran's research across multiple universities found that 1 in 3 students now displays extreme perfectionist tendencies. These numbers have tripled since the 1980s. But this epidemic is not limited to students. Working professionals, parents, athletes, artists, perfectionism is destroying lives across all demographics and age groups. Understanding true perfectionism. Most people think perfectionism means having high standards or wanting to do good work. This is completely wrong. Perfectionism is a psychological trap with very specific characteristics. Real perfectionism involves setting unrealistically high standards that are impossible to achieve consistently. It means your self-worth depends entirely on your performance. Every mistake feels like a personal failure rather than a learning opportunity. Perfectionists engage in constant self-criticism. They focus obsessively on flaws while ignoring achievements. They procrastinate on important tasks because they fear the results will not be perfect. Most importantly, perfectionists believe that making mistakes means they are fundamentally flawed as human beings. This belief system creates enormous psychological distress. The 3 types of perfectionism. Self-oriented perfectionism. This occurs when you set impossibly high standards for yourself. You demand perfection in everything you do, from work projects to personal appearance to social interactions. For example, you give a presentation and 95% of people respond positively. But instead of celebrating this success, you obsess over the 5% who seemed uninterested. You convince yourself the entire presentation was a failure. Self-oriented perfectionists often struggle with decision-making because no option seems good enough. They rewrite emails dozens of times. They spend hours choosing what to wear. Simple decisions become paralyzingly complex. Other-oriented perfectionism. This involves expecting perfection from other people. You become frustrated when family members make mistakes. You criticize colleagues for not meeting your standards. You feel disappointed when friends do not respond exactly as you hoped. Other-oriented perfectionism destroys relationships. Nobody can meet perfectionist expectations consistently. This leads to constant conflict and eventual isolation. Partners of other-oriented perfectionists often describe feeling like they are walking on eggshells. They never know when their normal human behavior will trigger criticism or disappointment. Socially prescribed perfectionism. This is the most dangerous type. You believe the entire world expects you to be perfect. Society, family, work culture, social media, everything feels like it is demanding flawless performance. You feel constantly judged and evaluated. Making mistakes in public feels catastrophic. You wear masks to hide your authentic self because showing vulnerability seems unacceptable. Social media has dramatically increased socially prescribed perfectionism. Everyone else appears to have perfect lives, perfect relationships, perfect careers. The comparison is endless and devastating. The real cost of perfectionism. Research shows perfectionism leads to a 300% increase in depression and anxiety rates. Perfectionists have higher rates of eating disorders, suicide attempts, and substance abuse. Relationships suffer because perfectionist expectations are impossible to meet. Career progression stalls because perfectionist procrastination prevents taking necessary risks. Physical health deteriorates through chronic stress, insomnia, headaches, digestive issues, and weakened immune systems. The pursuit of perfection literally makes people sick. Academic performance actually decreases among perfectionist students despite their intense efforts. The pressure creates mental blocks that interfere with learning and creativity. Why perfectionism is increasing. Modern society has created perfect conditions for perfectionism to flourish. Social media presents curated highlight reels that seem like normal life. Educational systems emphasize rankings and competitions over learning and growth. Economic insecurity makes people feel they must be perfect to survive in competitive job markets. Advertising constantly suggests that you are not good enough as you are and need products or achievements to become worthy. Parenting styles have shifted toward intensive management of children's lives and outcomes. Kids learn that love and approval depend on performance, rather than simply existing as valuable human beings. The result is an entire generation that has never learned to accept themselves as imperfect humans, deserving of love and belonging, regardless of their achievements. Chapter 2. The Childhood Roots of Perfectionism. How perfectionism develops. Perfectionism is not a personality trait that people are born with. It develops through specific childhood experiences that teach children their worth depends on their performance. Understanding these origins is crucial, because recognizing the source of perfectionist beliefs is the first step toward changing them. Most adults with perfectionism can trace their patterns back to childhood messages and experiences. Had conditional love and approval. The most significant factor in developing perfectionism is conditional love from parents or caregivers. This happens when adults give attention, affection, and approval only when children achieve or behave in specific ways. For example, a parent might say, "I am so proud of you when you got first place," but remain silent or critical when the child gets second place. The child learns that their worth depends on being the best, not simply on being themselves. Even positive statements can create conditional love. Saying you are such a smart girl when a child gets good grades teaches them that being smart is what makes them valuable. What happens to their self-worth when they struggle academically? Children are extremely sensitive to these messages. They quickly learn which behaviors earn love and which behaviors lead to disappointment or criticism. They begin performing for approval rather than exploring their authentic interests and abilities. Critical and demanding environments, homes, where criticism is common, create defensive perfectionism. Children learn that being perfect is the only way to avoid painful criticism or rejection. Parents who constantly point out mistakes or ways to improve communicate that the child's current efforts are never sufficient. Even well-meaning feedback can become damaging when it is relentless. For example, a parent reviewing homework might focus entirely on the 3 problems answered incorrectly while ignoring the 17 answered correctly. The child learns that mistakes are unacceptable and that their efforts are inadequate. Some families have impossibly high standards for behavior achievement or appearance. Nothing the child does is quite good enough. There is always room for improvement, always another level to reach. This creates anxiety and hypervigilance. Children become obsessed with avoiding mistakes rather than embracing learning and growth. They develop an internal critic that mimics the external criticism they experienced. Overprotective and controlling parenting. Paradoxically, both critical and overprotective parenting can create perfectionism. When parents control every aspect of a child's life, they prevent the child from learning that they can handle challenges and setbacks. Helicopter parents who solve every problem and prevent every failure teach children that mistakes are dangerous and must be avoided at all costs. The child never develops confidence in their ability to recover from difficulties. Children often become perfectionistic as adults because they never learned that failure is survivable. They approach challenges with intense anxiety because they have no experience overcoming setbacks independently. Modeling and family patterns. Children learn more from what they observe than from what they are told. Parents who display perfectionist behaviors unconsciously teach these patterns to their children. A parent who works constantly, rewrites emails multiple times, becomes anxious about social events, or criticizes their own appearance is modeling perfectionist thinking and behavior. Family cultures that emphasize image management appearance and what other people think create perfectionist children. These families may never explicitly demand perfection, but the underlying message is clear. Children in these environments learn that being seen as perfect by others is more important than being authentic or happy. They develop skills in impression management rather than self-acceptance. School and educational pressure. Modern educational systems often reinforce perfectionist tendencies through emphasis on grades, rankings, and standardized test scores, rather than learning curiosity and personal growth. Children learn that their intelligence and worth are measured by numbers on report cards. They begin to see education as a performance, rather than an opportunity to explore ideas and develop skills. Competition with peers becomes more important than collaboration and mutual support. Students learn to view others as threats, rather than learning partners. Teachers who focus primarily on correcting errors, rather than encouraging effort and growth, contribute to perfectionist mindsets. Students learn that making mistakes is shameful, rather than natural and educational. Trauma and adverse experiences. Children who experience trauma, neglect, or inconsistent caregiving often develop perfectionism as a survival strategy. Being perfect feels like a way to prevent further harm or abandonment. These children may believe that if they can just be good enough, smart enough, or helpful enough, they can control their environment and keep themselves safe. Perfectionism becomes a hyper-vigilant coping mechanism. The child constantly monitors their own behavior and performance, trying to prevent any action that might trigger negative consequences. This type of perfectionism is particularly resistant to change because it feels essential for survival, even when the original threat no longer exists. The internal critic formation. Through these various childhood experiences, children develop what becomes a harsh internal critic. This voice constantly evaluates, judges, and finds fault with their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The internal critic sounds like a compilation of all the critical voices the child heard growing up. It becomes automatic and pervasive, influencing every aspect of their adult life. This critic is not trying to be helpful. It is trying to protect the person from the shame and rejection they learned to fear as children. But instead of protection, it creates constant suffering and limitation. Understanding that this critical voice is not their true self, but rather a learned response to childhood experiences, is crucial for recovery from perfectionism. Breaking generational patterns. Perfectionist parents often raise perfectionist children unless they consciously work to change these patterns. The good news is that awareness and intentional parenting can break these cycles. Parents who learn to offer unconditional love, celebrate effort over outcomes, model self-compassion, and allow children to experience age-appropriate failures, raise more resilient and self-accepting children. This requires parents to examine their own perfectionist tendencies and heal their own childhood wounds. It is difficult but essential work for creating healthier family dynamics. Chapter 3. The Perfectionism. Performance Paradox. The great lie of perfectionism. Society tells us that perfectionists are high achievers who succeed because of their exacting standards. This is one of the most damaging myths in modern culture. Scientific research proves the opposite is true. Perfectionism does not improve performance. It dramatically reduces it. The very traits that people think make perfectionists successful are precisely what prevent them from achieving their potential. Why perfectionism kills performance. Analysis paralysis. Perfectionists become trapped in endless analysis and planning phases. They research every possible option, consider every potential outcome, and try to anticipate every possible problem before taking action. This might sound thorough and professional, but it prevents progress. While perfectionists are still planning and analyzing, others are taking action, learning from experience and moving forward. Example. A perfectionist entrepreneur spends 2 years researching and planning the perfect business, while competitors launch imperfect businesses, learn from customers, and iterate toward success. The perfectionist's business plan might be flawless on paper, but it never gets tested in reality. Meanwhile, the competitors have real customers, real feedback, and real revenue. Fear-based decision-making. Perfectionism is rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, Fear of not being good enough. This fear creates conservative decision-making that avoids necessary risks. Innovation requires experimentation. Breakthrough achievements require trying things that might not work. Perfectionists avoid these risks because failure feels catastrophic. They choose safe, familiar paths even when bigger opportunities exist. They turn down promotions because they might not perform perfectly. They avoid creative projects because the outcomes are uncertain. This fear-based approach guarantees mediocrity. The biggest achievements require the biggest risks, and perfectionists are too afraid to take them. All or nothing. Thinking patterns. Perfectionists see only two possibilities for any endeavor: complete success or total failure. This binary thinking eliminates the middle ground where most real progress happens. In reality, most achievements involve partial successes, mixed results, incremental improvements, and learning from setbacks. Perfectionists cannot appreciate this natural process of development. When results are not perfect, perfectionists interpret them as complete failures. This prevents them from building on partial successes and learning from mixed outcomes. They abandon projects that show promise but are not immediately perfect. They waste enormous amounts of effort starting over rather than improving existing work. The comparison trap. Perfectionists constantly compare themselves to others, but they make unfair comparisons. They compare their internal struggles to other people's external successes. They see their own mistakes, frustrations, and setbacks clearly, while assuming others do not experience similar challenges. This creates a false sense that everyone else finds success easier. Social media amplifies this problem by presenting carefully curated highlight reels as authentic representations of other people's lives. Perfectionists compare their real experiences to these artificial presentations. The result is constant feelings of inadequacy and being behind. Instead of focusing on their own progress, they become obsessed with catching up to imaginary standards that do not actually exist. The procrastination connection. Avoidance as protection. Procrastination is perfectionism's primary symptom. When standards are impossibly high, starting feels overwhelming and potentially humiliating. Procrastination provides temporary relief from perfectionist anxiety. If you do not start, you cannot fail. If you do not try, you cannot be criticized. This creates a cycle where procrastination increases anxiety, which increases perfectionist standards, which increases procrastination. The person becomes trapped in inaction. Many perfectionists become experts at creating elaborate plans and systems for productivity while never actually implementing them. The planning feels productive, but avoids the vulnerability of actual work. Perfect timing. Fallacy. Perfectionists wait for perfect conditions before starting important work. They need the right mood, the right environment, the right amount of time, and the right resources. These perfect conditions rarely, if ever, occur naturally. Life is messy, unpredictable, and full of interruptions and constraints. While waiting for perfect timing, opportunities pass by. Other people start with imperfect conditions, make progress, and achieve results. The perfectionist eventually realizes they have waited too long, but instead of starting with current conditions, they wait for the next perfect opportunity that also never comes. Last-minute panic cycles. Some perfectionists use deadline pressure to overcome their procrastination. They wait until the last possible moment when external pressure forces action. This creates poor quality work because there is insufficient time for the perfectionist standards they originally demanded. The rush job reinforces their belief that they are not capable of good work. The cycle repeats with the next project. Procrastination followed by panic, followed by rushed, inadequate work, followed by self-criticism, followed by even higher standards for next time. This pattern creates enormous stress and prevents the development of sustainable work habits and realistic standards. Perfectionism versus excellence. Understanding the difference. Excellence and perfectionism are completely different orientations toward achievement. Excellent people focus on continuous improvement, while perfectionists focus on flawless outcomes. Excellent people set challenging but achievable goals. Perfectionists set impossible goals that guarantee failure and self-criticism. Excellent people learn from mistakes and setbacks. Perfectionists view mistakes as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. Excellent people enjoy the process of working toward goals. Perfectionists find no joy in work because the pressure for perfect results destroys intrinsic motivation. The growth mindset alternative. Carol Dweck's research on growth versus fixed mindset provides a powerful alternative to perfectionist thinking. Growth mindset focuses on learning and development rather than proving ability. People with growth mindset believe abilities can be developed through effort and practice. They see challenges as opportunities to improve rather than threats to their self-image. Mistakes become valuable feedback rather than personal failures. Setbacks become information about what needs adjustment rather than evidence of inadequacy. This mindset creates resilience, curiosity, and persistence. It allows people to take on bigger challenges and recover more quickly from disappointments. High achievers versus perfectionists. Research shows clear differences between high achievers and perfectionists. High achievers set realistic but challenging goals and adjust them based on experience and feedback. They focus on effort and improvement rather than comparison with others. They celebrate progress rather than demanding perfect outcomes. High achievers maintain perspective about individual projects within larger life goals. They do not stake their entire self-worth on single outcomes. Most importantly, high achievers maintain their well-being and relationships while pursuing goals. They understand that success means nothing if it comes at the cost of health and connection. The creativity killer. Perfectionism is creativity's worst enemy. Creative work requires experimentation, playfulness, and willingness to create terrible first drafts. Perfectionists cannot tolerate the messy, uncertain process that leads to creative breakthroughs. They want to skip directly to polished final products. This prevents them from developing creative skills, which only improve through practice with imperfect work. The most creative people produce enormous amounts of mediocre work alongside their masterpieces. Perfectionist writers never finish novels because the first chapters are not perfect. Perfectionist artists never complete paintings because they obsess over tiny flaws. The irony is that perfectionism prevents people from creating the excellent work they desperately want to produce. Chapter 4. The Mental Health Crisis. The Devastating Psychology of Perfectionism. Perfectionism is not a quirky personality trait or a harmless desire for quality work. It is a serious mental health risk factor that increases the likelihood of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and suicide. The psychological impact of perfectionism goes far beyond occasional stress or disappointment. It creates persistent patterns of thinking and feeling that undermine mental wellness and life satisfaction. Understanding these mental health consequences is crucial because many people continue pursuing perfectionist goals, thinking they are being responsible or ambitious when they are actually harming themselves. Depression and the perfectionist mind. The hopelessness cycle. Perfectionist depression develops through a predictable pattern. Impossibly high standards lead to inevitable failure, which triggers intense self-criticism and feelings of inadequacy. The person concludes they are fundamentally flawed and incapable of success. This creates hopelessness about their ability to achieve their goals or be happy. Unlike situational depression that responds to external changes, perfectionist depression is internally generated and persists even when external circumstances improve. The internal critic becomes relentless and cruel. It interprets every setback as evidence of personal failure, rather than normal life experiences that everyone encounters. Perfectionist depression symptoms. Depression in perfectionists often presents differently than classic depression. Instead of obvious sadness, there may be chronic irritability and frustration. Perfectionists may appear highly functional while internally experiencing persistent feelings of inadequacy and failure. They maintain external performance while suffering internally. Sleep problems are common because perfectionists ruminate about mistakes and inadequate performance. They replay situations obsessively, trying to figure out how to have been perfect. Withdrawal occurs because perfectionists feel ashamed of their perceived failures and inadequacies. They avoid situations where their imperfections might be noticed. The comparison depression. Social media has created new forms of perfectionist depression based on constant comparison with others' curated presentations of their lives. Perfectionists scroll through feeds, seeing everyone else's vacations, achievements, relationships, and experiences, while feeling their own life is inadequate by comparison. They do not recognize that they are comparing their internal experience, complete with struggles and disappointments, to others' external presentations that hide similar struggles. This comparison creates persistent feelings of being left behind, missing out, and not measuring up to social standards that do not actually exist. Anxiety and the need for control. Perfectionist anxiety patterns. Perfectionism creates specific types of anxiety centered around performance evaluation and the possibility of making mistakes. Performance anxiety becomes intense before presentations, meetings, dates, or any situation where the perfectionist might be judged. The fear of imperfect performance feels overwhelming. Decision anxiety paralyzes perfectionists, who cannot choose between options because none seems perfect. Simple decisions become sources of enormous stress. Social anxiety develops because perfectionists fear saying or doing something that reveals their imperfections to others. They become hypervigilant about their behavior in social situations. The control illusion. Perfectionists believe that if they can just be perfect enough, they can control outcomes and prevent negative experiences. This is a powerful but false belief. Life is inherently uncertain and uncontrollable. Weather, traffic, other people's moods, economic conditions, health issues, countless variables affect outcomes beyond individual control. The attempt to control outcomes through perfectionism actually increases anxiety because it sets up constant vigilance against threats that cannot be eliminated. When perfectionists inevitably encounter uncontrollable negative experiences, they blame themselves for not being perfect enough rather than accepting the reality of uncertainty. Catastrophic thinking. Perfectionist anxiety involves imagining worst-case scenarios and treating them as likely outcomes. Making a mistake becomes career-ending. Social awkwardness becomes permanent rejection. This catastrophic thinking creates enormous stress about relatively minor events. The anxiety response becomes disproportionate to actual risks. The perfectionist lives in a constant state of threat detection, scanning for potential problems and mistakes. This hypervigilance is exhausting and prevents relaxation and enjoyment. Eating disorders and body perfectionism. Outside, the perfect body myth. Modern culture promotes impossible body standards through advertising, social media, and entertainment. Perfectionists internalize these standards as personal requirements. Diet culture combines with perfectionism to create dangerous relationships with food and exercise. The pursuit of the perfect body becomes an obsession that dominates daily life. Social media influencers promote extreme fitness routines, restrictive diets, and before and after transformations that seem to prove perfect bodies are achievable through enough discipline. Perfectionists approach body goals with the same all-or-nothing thinking they apply to other areas. They cannot maintain balance or moderation in eating and exercise. Eating disorder development. Research shows that 90% of eating disorders involve significant perfectionist traits. The disorders often begin as attempts to achieve body perfectionism. Anorexia develops when perfectionists apply extreme standards to weight and food intake. The pursuit of the perfect thin body becomes life-threatening. Bulimia often involves cycles of perfectionist restriction, followed by perceived failure and binge eating, followed by compensatory behaviors to return to perfect eating. Binge eating disorder can develop when perfectionists use food to cope with the stress and emotions created by impossible standards in other life areas. Exercise addiction. Perfectionist approaches to fitness can become compulsive and harmful. Exercise addiction develops when working out becomes mandatory rather than enjoyable. Signs include exercising despite injury or illness, feeling extreme anxiety when missing workouts, and organizing entire life around exercise schedules. The pursuit of perfect fitness results creates the same psychological patterns as other perfectionist behaviors. Moderate improvements feel like failures compared to impossible goals. Damage and isolation. How? Other-oriented perfectionism in relationships. When perfectionists apply their standards to partners, family members, and friends, relationships become battlegrounds of criticism and disappointment. Partners report feeling constantly evaluated and found lacking. They describe walking on eggshells, afraid that normal human behavior will trigger perfectionist criticism. The perfectionist becomes frustrated that others do not share their standards or efforts. They interpret this as laziness or lack of caring rather than healthy boundaries. This dynamic creates distance and resentment. The non-perfectionist partner may withdraw to avoid criticism, while the perfectionist feels unsupported and alone. Fear of intimacy. Perfectionists often fear deep, intimate relationships because intimacy requires vulnerability and showing imperfections to another person. They may maintain surface-level relationships that do not threaten their perfect image, but leave them feeling lonely and disconnected. Dating becomes particularly difficult because perfectionists fear being rejected if someone discovers their flaws and inadequacies. They may choose partners who seem perfect rather than partners who are compatible, leading to relationships based on image rather than genuine connection. Social isolation. Many perfectionists gradually withdraw from social connections to avoid situations where their imperfections might be revealed or judged. They decline invitations to events where they might not perform perfectly. They avoid trying new activities where they would be beginners. This isolation increases depression and anxiety while confirming the perfectionist's belief that they are different and alone in their struggles. The lack of social connection prevents them from discovering that others also struggle with imperfection, and that authentic relationships accept human flaws. Suicide risk and perfectionism. The ultimate escape. Suicide ideation and attempts occur at higher rates among people with perfectionist traits. When perfectionists conclude they can never be good enough, life itself may feel pointless. The all-or-nothing thinking that characterizes perfectionism can extend to life itself. If they cannot live perfectly, they may conclude they should not live at all. Perfectionist suicidality often follows major perceived failures or public mistakes that feel intolerable to someone whose self-worth depends on perfect performance. The internal critic becomes so harsh and relentless that death seems preferable to continued self-torture about inadequacy and failure. Warning signs. Perfectionist suicide risk increases when the person expresses hopelessness about ever being good enough or meeting their standards. They may make statements about being a burden to others, or that everyone would be better off without them and their failures. Sudden calm after periods of intense self-criticism may indicate the person has decided on suicide as a solution to their perfectionist suffering. Any perfectionist expressing thoughts about death or suicide requires immediate professional intervention and support. Physical health consequences. Stress-related illness. The chronic stress of perfectionism takes a severe toll on physical health. Constant anxiety and self-criticism activate stress response systems that are meant for short-term emergencies. Chronic stress weakens immune systems, leading to frequent illnesses and slower recovery times. Perfectionists often get sick more often and stay sick longer. Digestive problems are common because stress disrupts normal digestive processes. Perfectionists may experience chronic stomach aches, nausea, and digestive disorders. Headaches and muscle tension result from the constant mental and physical tension of trying to be perfect. Many perfectionists experience chronic pain conditions. Sleep disorders. Perfectionist minds have difficulty shutting off at night. They ruminate about the day's mistakes and worry about tomorrow's challenges. Insomnia is extremely common among perfectionists who lie awake replaying conversations and situations, trying to figure out how to have handled them perfectly. Even when they fall asleep, perfectionists often experience restless sleep filled with anxiety dreams about failing or being criticized. The resulting sleep deprivation makes perfectionist thinking worse, creating a cycle of exhaustion and increased mental rigidity. Cardiovascular problems. The chronic stress and anxiety of perfectionism increases blood pressure and heart rate, putting strain on cardiovascular systems. Research shows perfectionists have higher rates of heart disease and stroke. The constant fight-or-flight response wears out the heart and blood vessels. Perfectionists also engage in stress-related behaviors like excessive caffeine consumption, poor eating habits, and lack of relaxation that further damage cardiovascular health. Breaking the mental health spiral. Understanding these mental health consequences is the first step toward recovery. Recognizing that perfectionism is harming rather than helping creates motivation for change. Professional help from therapists trained in perfectionism treatment can provide crucial support and guidance for recovery. The mental health impacts of perfectionism are serious, but they are also treatable. With proper support and intervention, people can recover from perfectionist mental health problems and build healthier relationships with achievement and self-worth. Chapter 5. Cognitive restructuring and mindset shifts. Understanding your perfectionist mind. Breaking free from perfectionism requires understanding how perfectionist thinking operates. These thought patterns are automatic and feel completely logical to perfectionists, but they are actually distorted and harmful. Cognitive restructuring involves identifying these distorted thought patterns and systematically replacing them with more realistic and helpful ways of thinking. This is not about positive thinking or pretending problems do not exist. It is about developing accurate, realistic thinking that supports mental health and actual achievement. Identifying perfectionist thought patterns. All or nothing thinking. This is the foundation of perfectionist thinking. Everything is either perfect or completely worthless, success or total failure, right or completely wrong. Examples of all or nothing thinking include: if this presentation is not perfect, I am a failure. If I eat one unhealthy food, I have ruined my entire diet. If I make any mistakes, I am incompetent. This thinking pattern eliminates the middle ground where most of life actually happens. Real achievements involve partial successes, mixed results, and gradual improvement. Learning to recognize all or nothing thoughts is the first step toward changing them. Notice when you use words like always, never perfect, complete, total, or other absolute terms. Catastrophizing. Perfectionists imagine worst-case scenarios and treat them as inevitable outcomes. Making a mistake becomes career-ending. Being criticized becomes permanent rejection. This pattern creates enormous anxiety about relatively minor events. The emotional response becomes completely disproportionate to actual risks and consequences. Examples include, if I mess up this project, I will be fired. If people see my flaws, they will reject me completely. If I fail at this, everyone will think I am incompetent. Reality checking involves asking what would actually happen and what evidence supports the catastrophic prediction versus more realistic outcomes. Mental filter. Perfectionists focus exclusively on negative details while ignoring positive aspects of situations. They filter out successes and achievements while magnifying mistakes and flaws. A perfectionist might receive 10 pieces of positive feedback and one suggestion for improvement, but focus entirely on the criticism while dismissing the praise. This creates a distorted view of reality where nothing ever seems good enough, regardless of actual performance or achievements. Learning to actively notice and acknowledge positive aspects requires conscious effort, but gradually changes the mental filtering process. Should statements. Perfectionist thinking is full of rigid rules about how things should be. I should never make mistakes. People should always appreciate my efforts. Life should be fair. These should statements create constant frustration and disappointment because reality does not conform to perfectionist expectations. They also create guilt and shame when the person fails to meet their own impossible should standards. Replacing should statements with preferences or realistic expectations reduces emotional distress while maintaining motivation for improvement. Challenging perfectionist beliefs. The evidence examination. When perfectionist thoughts arise, examine the actual evidence supporting them. Is it true that making mistakes means you are a failure? What evidence contradicts this belief? Look for examples of successful people who made mistakes. Consider times when you learned valuable lessons from errors. Gather evidence that challenges perfectionist beliefs. This process reveals that perfectionist beliefs are not facts, but rather learned interpretations that can be changed with new evidence and perspective. Ask yourself, what would I tell a friend who had this thought? Would I judge others as harshly as I judge myself? What evidence contradicts this perfectionist alternative? For each perfectionist thought, develop a more realistic alternative that acknowledges challenges while maintaining hope and motivation. Instead of, I must be perfect or I am worthless, try, I can strive for excellence while accepting that mistakes are part of learning and growth. Instead of, if people see my flaws, they will reject me, try, authentic relationships accept imperfection, and people who reject me for being human are not good friends anyway. These alternative thoughts feel more balanced and create less anxiety while still supporting effort and improvement. The compassionate reframe. Treat yourself with the same kindness you would show a good friend facing similar challenges. What would you say to someone you care about in this situation? Self-compassion does not mean lowering standards or accepting poor performance. It means maintaining perspective and treating yourself with basic human kindness. This involves acknowledging suffering without making it worse through self-criticism. It means recognizing that struggle is part of the human experience, not evidence of personal failure. Developing flexible thinking. The good enough standard. Learning to recognize when something is good enough requires developing judgment about when additional effort provides meaningful value versus perfectionist obsession. The 80-20 rule suggests that 80% of results come from 20% of effort. The remaining 20% of results require 80% of effort. In most situations, good enough is actually good enough. The additional effort required for perfection rarely provides proportional value and often prevents moving on to other important activities. Practice identifying the good enough point in various activities and consciously choosing to stop there instead of continuing toward impossible perfection. Progress over perfection. Focus on improvement rather than ideal outcomes. Small, consistent progress over time creates more achievement than sporadic attempts at perfection. Celebrate incremental improvements rather than waiting for perfect results. Notice and acknowledge effort and progress, regardless of final outcomes. This mindset creates sustainable motivation because progress is always possible, even when perfection is not achievable. Keep a progress journal noting small improvements and learning experiences rather than focusing only on major achievements or failures. Process versus outcome. Focus. Shift attention from outcomes, which are often beyond complete control, to processes which are within your influence. Focus on showing up consistently, putting in effort, learning from experience, and maintaining good good habits rather than achieving specific results. This reduces anxiety because you can control your effort and approach even when you cannot control outcomes. It also increases intrinsic motivation because the work itself becomes satisfying rather than just a means to perfect results. Building realistic standards. The standards audit. Examine your current standards in different life areas. Are they realistic and achievable or impossibly high? How do they compare to standards you would set for others? Consider the cost of maintaining these standards. Do they improve your life and relationships, or create stress and problems? Ask trusted friends or family members if they think your standards are realistic. Others can often see when standards are unreasonably high. Be willing to lower standards that are creating more problems than benefits. This is not giving up or being lazy. It is being realistic and strategic. The value-based approach. Align standards with your core values rather than external expectations or perfectionist anxiety. What really matters to you in each area of life? If health is important, focus on sustainable habits rather than perfect nutrition. If relationships matter, prioritize connection over impression management. This creates standards that feel meaningful and sustainable rather than arbitrary and punitive. Regular values clarification helps ensure that your standards support what is truly important rather than perfectionist fears and social pressures. The experimental mindset. Approach challenges as experiments rather than tests of your worth. Experiments can have unexpected results without being failures. This mindset increases willingness to try new things and take risks because the outcome is information rather than a judgment of your value as a person. Failed experiments provide valuable data about what does not work, which is essential information for finding what does work. Scientists do not consider failed experiments as personal failures. They analyze results objectively and design better experiments based on what they learn. Apply this same objective curiosity to your own life challenges. What can you learn from this experience? What would you try differently next time? Self-compassion as foundation. Understanding. Self-compassion. Self-compassion is not self-pity or self-indulgence. It is treating yourself with the same kindness you would show a good friend who is struggling. Kristen Neff's research identifies 3 core components of self-compassion that directly counter perfectionist thinking patterns. Self-compassion provides the emotional safety needed to acknowledge mistakes and imperfections without being overwhelmed by shame and self-criticism. This safety creates space for learning and growth, rather than defensive perfectionist responses to challenges and setbacks. Self-kindness versus self-judgment. Self-kindness involves treating yourself gently when you make mistakes or face difficulties, rather than attacking yourself with harsh criticism. Notice the tone of your internal dialogue. Is it encouraging and supportive or critical and harsh? Would you speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself? Practice responding to your own struggles with the same warmth and understanding you would offer someone you care about. This does not mean avoiding responsibility or ignoring problems. It means addressing challenges from a place of support rather than attack. Common humanity versus isolation. Perfectionist thinking creates isolation by convincing you that your struggles are unique evidence of your inadequacy, while everyone else manages life perfectly. Common humanity recognizes that struggle, difficulty, and imperfection are universal human experiences. Everyone makes mistakes, faces challenges, and feels inadequate sometimes. This perspective reduces shame by normalizing the very experiences that perfectionist thinking pathologizes. Connect with others about shared struggles rather than hiding imperfections. Discover that authenticity creates deeper relationships than perfect facades. Mindfulness versus over-identification. Mindfulness involves observing your thoughts and feelings without being completely consumed by them. You can notice perfectionist thoughts without believing them completely. Over-identification means becoming so merged with thoughts and emotions that they feel like absolute truth, rather than temporary mental events. Practice observing perfectionist thoughts with curiosity rather than immediately believing them. Notice them arising and passing without being overwhelmed. This creates space between you and your thoughts, allowing for more flexible responses rather than automatic perfectionist reactions. Practical cognitive exercises. The daily thought record. Keep a record of perfectionist thoughts throughout the day. Notice patterns, triggers, and common themes in your thinking. Write down the situation that triggered considered perfectionist thinking, the specific thoughts that arose, and the emotions you experienced. Then practice developing more balanced alternatives to these thoughts. What would be a more realistic way to think about this situation? Over time, this practice increases awareness of perfectionist thinking patterns and builds skill in developing healthier alternatives. The best friend technique. When facing perfectionist self-criticism, ask yourself what you would say to your best friend in the same situation. Most people are much kinder and more encouraging to friends than to themselves. This technique helps access your natural capacity for compassion. Practice speaking to yourself with the same warmth, patience, and encouragement you would offer someone you care about. This builds the habit of self-compassion while reducing the harsh internal criticism that fuels perfectionist anxiety and depression. The evidence court. When perfectionist thoughts arise, put them on trial. What evidence supports this thought? What evidence contradicts it? Consider alternative explanations for situations. Could there be reasons other than your inadequacy for why things did not go perfectly? Look for patterns in your thinking. Do you consistently interpret neutral events as evidence of personal failure? This process reveals how perfectionist thinking distorts reality and helps develop more accurate, balanced perspectives. Chapter 6. Practical Daily Strategies. Morning Routines for Recovery. Starting without perfection. Morning routines can either reinforce perfectionist patterns or support recovery depending on how they are structured and approached. Perfectionist morning routines are rigid, detailed, and create anxiety when disrupted. Recovery-oriented routines are flexible, forgiving, and focused on self-care rather than performance. Begin each day by setting intentions rather than demanding perfect execution of elaborate routines. What do you want to focus on today? How do you want to approach challenges? Allow your routine to adapt to different circumstances. Some days you may have time for meditation and exercise. Other days, a few deep breaths and positive intention may be enough. Intention setting versus goal obsession. Replace rigid daily goals with flexible intentions that guide behavior without creating pressure for perfect outcomes. Instead of "I must exercise for exactly 1 hour," set an intention like "I want to move my body in whatever way feels good today." Intentions create direction without the all or nothing pressure that perfectionist goals generate. They allow for creativity and adaptation based on circumstances. This approach maintains motivation while reducing the anxiety and self-criticism that comes from failing to meet perfectionist daily standards. Morning self-compassion practice. Begin each day with a brief self-compassion practice that sets a tone of kindness rather than self-criticism. Place your hand on your heart and remind yourself that today will include both successes and mistakes, and both are normal parts of being human. Offer yourself the same encouragement you would give a friend facing the day ahead. May I be kind to myself today. May I remember that I am enough as I am. This practice creates emotional resilience that helps handle whatever challenges the day brings without falling into perfectionist self-attack. Work and professional strategies. The good enough principle in practice. Professional perfectionism destroys productivity and increases stress, while rarely improving actual work quality significantly. Learn to recognize the point of diminishing returns, where additional effort produces minimal improvement. Most professional work reaches this point well before perfection. Set time limits for tasks and stick to them. When the time is up, submit the work rather than continuing to polish indefinitely. Practice sending emails after one review rather than rewriting them multiple times. Most recipients will not notice the imperfections you are worried about. Deadline management. Without panic. Perfectionist procrastination creates unnecessary deadline panic and stress. Develop systems that support consistent progress rather than last-minute rushes. Break large projects into smaller tasks with their own mini deadlines. This prevents the overwhelm that leads to procrastination. Plan to finish projects slightly before the actual deadline to allow time for reasonable final review without panic-induced changes. Accept that work completed under time pressure will not be perfect and that this is acceptable in most professional contexts. Feedback as growth tool. Transform your relationship with feedback from threat to opportunity. Perfectionist thinking interprets all feedback as criticism and evidence of failure. Actively seek feedback early in projects rather than avoiding it until work feels perfect. Early feedback improves final outcomes while reducing anxiety. Listen to feedback objectively rather than immediately defending or internally criticizing yourself. What useful information can you extract? Thank people for feedback even when it is difficult to hear. This encourages honest communication that supports your growth and improvement. Managing Managing workplace perfectionism. Set realistic expectations with supervisors and colleagues about project timelines and outcomes. Communicate what is achievable rather than promising impossible standards. Ask for clarification about priorities when everything feels equally important. Most workplaces have limited resources and infinite possible improvements. Delegate tasks appropriately, rather than trying to control every detail. Others may complete work differently, but still effectively. Take breaks during the workday to reset perfectionist thinking. Short walks, meditation, or simple breathing exercises can interrupt perfectionist anxiety spirals. Technology and social media boundaries. The comparison detox. Social media comparison is one of the primary drivers of modern perfectionism. Conscious curation of your feeds can dramatically reduce perfectionist triggers. Unfollow accounts that consistently make you feel inadequate or behind in life. This includes influencers' lifestyle accounts and even friends who post primarily highlight reels. Follow accounts that show realistic, imperfect life, including mental health advocates, people sharing authentic struggles, and creators who promote self-acceptance. Notice how different types of content make you feel. Are you inspired and motivated, or anxious and inadequate after viewing certain posts? Digital minimalism for mental health. Technology overload can increase perfectionist anxiety by creating constant input and comparison opportunities. Set specific times for checking social media, email, and news, rather than constantly monitoring throughout the day. Limits and notification settings to reduce the constant pull of digital perfectionist triggers. Create phone-free zones and times, particularly during meals, family time, and before bed, to allow mental rest from comparison opportunities. Reality check practices. Develop habits that remind you that social media presentations are curated highlights, not complete reality. Before posting, consider whether you are sharing authentic moments or contributing to perfectionist comparison culture. When viewing others' posts, remind yourself that you are seeing selected moments, not complete lives. Everyone has struggles that do not appear in their feeds. Connect with friends in person or through authentic conversations, rather than only through social media presentations. Relationship strategies for recovery. Communication without perfection. Perfectionist communication patterns include over-explaining, defending against imagined criticism, and avoiding authentic vulnerability. Practice sharing your actual thoughts and feelings rather than carefully crafted perfect responses. Authentic communication creates deeper connections. Allow conversations to be messy, imperfect, and sometimes awkward. Real relationships include misunderstandings that get worked out over time. Express needs and boundaries directly, rather than expecting others to read your mind or meet unstated perfectionist standards. Managing other-oriented perfectionism. Your perfectionist expectations damage relationships by creating impossible standards for others to meet. Notice when you feel frustrated with others for not meeting your standards. Are these expectations realistic and fair, or perfectionist demands? Practice accepting others as they are, rather than as projects to improve. People change when they choose to not because of external pressure. Focus on your own behavior and responses, rather than trying to control others' actions and choices. Building authentic connections. Perfectionist relationships are based on image management, rather than genuine connection. Recovery requires increasing authenticity. Share appropriate struggles and imperfections with trusted friends. Discover that vulnerability creates intimacy rather than rejection. Accept that some relationships may not survive increased authenticity. People who only accepted your perfect facade were not genuine friends anyway. Invest energy in relationships with people who appreciate your authentic self, including flaws, rather than those who require constant performance. Health and fitness approaches. Exercise without obsession. Fitness perfectionism can be as destructive as perfectionism in other areas, creating unhealthy relationships with exercise and body image. Focus on consistency rather than intensity. Regular, moderate exercise provides more health benefits than sporadic extreme workouts. Listen to your body rather than forcing predetermined workout plans. Some days require rest or gentler movement regardless of your schedule. Enjoy movement rather than punishing yourself through exercise. Find activities that feel good rather than only those that produce specific results. Allow flexibility in your fitness routine. Life circumstances change, and your exercise habits should adapt rather than become additional sources of stress. Nutrition balance without restriction. Food perfectionism often leads to eating disorders or unhealthy relationships with eating that damage both physical and mental health. Adopt an 80-20 approach to nutrition where most choices support health while allowing flexibility for enjoyment and social connection. Avoid labeling foods as good or bad, which creates shame and guilt around normal eating experiences. Practice intuitive eating by paying attention to hunger, fullness, and satisfaction rather than following rigid external rules. Remember that perfect nutrition is impossible and unnecessary. Your body can handle imperfect eating while maintaining health. Sleep hygiene without obsession. Sleep perfectionism can create anxiety that actually interferes with sleep quality. Develop reasonable sleep habits without rigid perfectionist rules. Aim for consistent sleep and wake times while allowing flexibility for social events and changing circumstances. Create a relaxing bedtime routine that signals sleep time without becoming an elaborate perfectionist ritual that creates pressure. Accept that some nights will include poor sleep due to stress, excitement, or other factors beyond your control. Focus on overall sleep patterns rather than perfecting individual nights. One poor night does not ruin your sleep health. Financial and career management. Career advancement without burnout. Perfectionist career approaches often lead to burnout, overwork, and neglect of other life areas, while actually hindering long-term career success. Set realistic career goals that align with your values and life priorities rather than external expectations or perfectionist fantasies. Develop skills consistently over time rather than expecting immediate mastery. Career growth happens gradually through accumulated experience. Take calculated risks rather than waiting for perfect opportunities or complete preparation. Most career advancement requires action despite uncertainty. Maintain work-life balance by setting boundaries around work time and availability. Sustainable career success requires rest and recovery. Money management without anxiety. Financial perfectionism creates anxiety about spending decisions and unrealistic expectations about financial control and security. Create reasonable budgets that allow for both financial responsibility and life enjoyment rather than rigid perfectionist restrictions. Accept that unexpected expenses and financial mistakes are normal parts of adult life rather than evidence of personal failure. Focus on long-term financial patterns rather than perfecting individual purchase decisions. Small, imperfect choices rarely impact overall financial health. Seek financial education without expecting to become a perfect money manager overnight. Financial skills develop through experience over time. Parenting without perfectionism. Modeling healthy achievement. Children learn more from what they observe than what they are told. Model healthy relationships with achievement and mistakes. Share age-appropriate stories about your own mistakes and learning experiences. Show children that failure is survivable and educational. Praise effort, process, and improvement rather than only results and achievements. Help children develop internal motivation rather than performance anxiety. Allow children to experience age-appropriate failures and consequences rather than protecting them from all disappointment. Create family cultures that value learning, creativity, and connection over external achievement and appearance. Supporting without enabling help. Children develop resilience by providing support without removing all challenges and difficulties from their lives. Encourage children to try new activities without pressure to excel immediately. Let them be beginners without shame. Avoid living vicariously through children's achievements. Their successes and failures are theirs, not reflections of your parenting quality. Teach children that their worth comes from being themselves, not from their performance in academic, sports, or other activities. Chapter 7. The Science Behind Change. Neuroplasticity and Perfectionism. Recovery. How the brain creates perfectionist patterns. Understanding the neuroscience behind perfectionism provides hope for change. Perfectionist thinking patterns are learned neural pathways that can be modified through consistent practice. Brain imaging studies show that perfectionists have overactive anterior cingulate cortex areas responsible for error detection. This creates hypersensitivity to mistakes and imperfections. The amygdala fear center becomes hyperactive in perfectionist brains, responding to normal challenges as threats. This creates the anxiety that drives perfectionist avoidance behaviors. Simultaneously, prefrontal cortex areas responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation show decreased activity, making it harder to think logically about perfectionist fears. These neural patterns developed through repeated experiences and can be changed through new repeated experiences that create healthier neural pathways. The science of habit change. Perfectionist behaviors are deeply ingrained habits that operate automatically without conscious decision-making. Changing these patterns requires understanding how how habits form and change. The habit loop includes cue, routine, and reward. Perfectionist habits might include cues like deadlines or social situations, routines like procrastination or over-preparation, and rewards like temporary anxiety relief. Changing perfectionist habits requires identifying these components and systematically replacing perfectionist routines with healthier responses to the same cues. This process takes time and repetition because new neural pathways must become stronger than existing perfectionist patterns through consistent practice. Research shows that habit change requires approximately 66 days of consistent practice, though complex habits like perfectionism may take longer to fully transform. Evidence-based treatment approaches. Cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT has the strongest research support for treating perfectionism. CBT helps identify and change the thought patterns that drive perfectionist behaviors. Mindfulness-based interventions help create space between perfectionist thoughts and automatic responses. This space allows for more conscious choices rather than reactive perfectionist behaviors. Acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT focuses on accepting difficult thoughts and emotions while taking action based on values rather than perfectionist fears. Self-compassion training directly counters perfectionist self-criticism with kindness and understanding. Research shows this approach effectively reduces perfectionist anxiety and depression. These approaches work by gradually rewiring brain patterns through repeated practice of healthier thinking and behavioral responses. Research on perfectionism recovery. Longitudinal studies. Long-term research following perfectionist individuals over years provides insights into recovery patterns and what factors support lasting change. Studies show that perfectionism can be successfully treated with appropriate intervention, but recovery requires ongoing practice rather than one-time insight or decision. Individuals who maintain recovery consistently practice self-compassion, continue using cognitive restructuring techniques, and maintain supportive social connections. Relapse prevention involves recognizing early warning signs of perfectionist thinking, returning and having specific strategies ready for managing these episodes. Research indicates that perfectionism recovery is possible at any age, though earlier intervention provides better long-term outcomes. Successful recovery factors studies identify specific factors that predict successful recovery from perfectionism, including willingness to tolerate discomfort during change process. Social support from family, friends, or support groups significantly improves recovery outcomes. People recover better when they are not changing alone. Professional therapy support, especially in early recovery stages, helps individuals develop skills and maintain motivation during difficult change periods. Regular self-care practices, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, and stress management, support the brain changes needed for perfectionism recovery. Meaning and purpose beyond perfectionist achievement help individuals maintain motivation for recovery when perfectionist rewards are no longer available. Measuring recovery. Progress. Recovery from perfectionism is not all or nothing, but involves gradual changes in thinking behavior and emotional responses over time. Early signs of recovery include increased self-compassion, reduced anxiety about mistakes, and greater willingness to try new things despite imperfection risks. Middle-stage recovery involves more consistent use of healthy thinking patterns, improved relationships, and increased ability to enjoy processes rather than only outcomes. Advanced recovery includes automatic self-compassionate responses, resilience during setbacks, and ability to help others with perfectionist struggles. Complete recovery means perfectionist thoughts may still arise occasionally, but they no longer control behavior or create significant distress. The biology of self-compassion. Stress response system changes. Self-compassion practice literally changes how the nervous system responds to stress and challenges, creating more resilience and less reactivity. Perfectionist stress responses involve fight or flight activation that creates anxiety, tension, and avoidance behaviors. This response treats normal challenges as emergencies. Self-compassion activates the mammalian caregiving system associated with feelings of safety, connection, and calm. This system supports learning and growth rather than defensive reactions. Regular self-compassion practice reduces cortisol levels, blood pressure, and other stress markers, while increasing immune system function and overall health. These biological changes support perfectionism recovery by making it easier to tolerate the discomfort of making mistakes and accepting imperfection. Oxytocin and connection. Self-compassion increases oxytocin production, the hormone associated with bonding, trust, and social connection. This counters perfectionist isolation and shame. Higher oxytocin levels increase motivation for self-care and healthy behaviors while reducing anxiety and depression associated with perfectionism. The biological basis of self-compassion explains why this practice feels good and becomes self-reinforcing over time, unlike perfectionist behaviors that create stress. Understanding the science behind self-compassion increases motivation to practice it consistently, even when perfectionist thinking argues against self-kindness. Social psychology of perfectionism. Cultural influences on recovery. Different cultures have varying levels of support for perfectionism recovery. Understanding cultural factors helps individuals navigate social pressures during change. Cultures that emphasize individual achievement, competition, and appearance tend to reinforce perfectionist behaviors, making recovery more challenging. Cultures that value community process and acceptance of imperfection provide more environmental support for perfectionism recovery. Individuals recovering from perfectionism may need to find subcultures or communities that support their recovery goals rather than relying solely on mainstream cultural messages. Family systems and change. Perfectionism often develops within family systems that reward perfectionist behaviors. Recovery may require changing family dynamics and communication patterns. Family members may unconsciously sabotage perfectionism recovery because they benefited from the perfectionist's overfunctioning, or because change threatens familiar patterns. Successful recovery often requires setting boundaries with family members who continue to demand perfectionist behaviors or criticize recovery efforts. Family therapy can help entire family systems develop healthier achievement orientations that support all members rather than demanding perfectionist performance. Workplace culture. Impact. Many workplace cultures reward perfectionist behaviors in the short term while creating burnout and decreased innovation over time. Individuals recovering from perfectionism may need to advocate for realistic deadlines, appropriate workloads, and cultures that support learning from mistakes. Some career changes may be necessary if workplace cultures are incompatible with perfectionism recovery and mental health maintenance. Organizations that support employee well-being and sustainable performance create environments where perfectionism recovery can be maintained long-term. Chapter 8. Building supportive communities. Creating anti-perfectionist environments. Family culture transformation. Families play a crucial role in either perpetuating or healing perfectionist patterns. Creating family environments that support authenticity over performance requires intentional changes. Family meetings can establish new values that prioritize effort, learning, and kindness over achievements and appearances. Include all family members in creating these new expectations. Establish family traditions that celebrate effort and improvement rather than only perfect outcomes. Create space for sharing mistakes and learning experiences. Model the behavior you want to see. Share your own struggles and imperfections age appropriately to show children that adults also make mistakes and continue learning. Practice family gratitude that includes appreciation for each person as they are not only for their achievements or contributions. Educational environment. Reform schools and educational institutions often reinforce perfectionist thinking through emphasis on grades, rankings, and standardized performance measures. Advocate for educational approaches that emphasize growth process and individual improvement rather than comparison and competition with others. Support teachers and schools that implement growth mindset practices, celebrate mistakes as learning opportunities, and focus on effort rather than innate ability. Encourage diverse definitions of success that include creativity, collaboration, problem-solving, and other skills not easily measured by traditional testing. Work with schools to implement social-emotional learning programs that teach self-compassion, resilience, and healthy achievement orientations. Workplace culture. Development organizations that support employee mental health and sustainable performance create environments where perfectionism recovery can thrive. Advocate for workplace policies that support work-life balance, realistic deadlines, and psychological safety for making mistakes and learning. Implement team practices that normalize discussing failures and lessons learned rather than only celebrating perfect successes. Provide training for managers on recognizing and supporting employees who struggle with perfectionism rather than rewarding perfectionist behaviors that lead to burnout. Create mentorship programs that pair recovering perfectionists with colleagues who model healthy achievement and self-compassion. Support systems and resources. Professional help options therapy provides crucial support for perfectionism recovery recovery, especially in early stages when change feels overwhelming and unfamiliar. Cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT helps identify and change perfectionist thought patterns while developing practical skills for managing perfectionist anxiety. Acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT focuses on accepting perfectionist thoughts without being controlled by them while taking action based on values rather than fears. Group therapy provides opportunities to connect with others struggling with similar issues while practicing vulnerability and receiving therapists who specifically understand perfectionism, rather than those who might inadvertently reinforce perfectionist tendencies. Support group benefits. Perfectionism. Support groups, whether in person or online, provide community connection and shared understanding that reduces isolation and shame. Group members can share practical strategies that have worked for them while providing encouragement during difficult parts of the recovery process. Hearing others share similar struggles helps normalize perfectionist experiences, while seeing others recover provides hope and motivation. Support groups provide accountability for practicing new behaviors while offering compassion when setbacks occur. Regular group attendance creates social connections based on authenticity rather than performance, providing models for healthy relationships. Building personal support networks. Recovery from perfectionism requires supportive relationships with people who appreciate authenticity over perfect performance. Identify friends and family members who already demonstrate self-compassion and healthy achievement orientations. Spend more time with these people. Gradually share your perfectionism recovery journey with trusted individuals who can provide encouragement and accountability. Set boundaries with people who consistently demand perfectionist performance or criticize your recovery efforts. Seek out new relationships through activities, classes, or groups where you can practice being authentic and imperfect while making connections. Community activism and change. Raising awareness. Many people suffer from perfectionism without understanding what it is or that recovery is possible. Education and awareness reduce stigma while encouraging help-seeking. Share your recovery story appropriately to help others recognize perfectionist patterns in their own lives. Advocate for mental health education in schools, workplaces, and communities that includes information about perfectionism and its treatment. Challenge perfectionist cultural messages when you encounter them in media, social conversations, and institutional policies. Support research and organizations working to understand and treat perfectionism while promoting mental health and well-being. Creating ripple effects. Your own perfectionism recovery creates positive effects for everyone around you, including family, friends, colleagues, and community members. Children who see adults practicing self-compassion and accepting imperfection learn that their worth does not depend on perfect performance. Colleagues who witness healthy achievement orientations may feel permission to set more realistic standards for themselves. Friends who experience authentic relationships with you may feel encouraged to be more genuine and vulnerable in their own connections. Your recovery contributes to cultural change by modeling alternatives to perfectionist achievement and appearance standards. Social media influence. Use social media platforms responsibly to share authentic experiences rather than contributing to perfectionist comparison culture. Post content that shows realistic life, including struggles, mistakes, and learning experiences alongside achievements and positive moments. Follow and support accounts that promote self-acceptance, mental health awareness, and healthy achievement rather than perfectionist inspiration. Engage authentically with others online by sharing genuine responses rather than carefully crafted perfect comments designed to manage impressions. Use your platform regardless of size to normalize imperfection and promote mental health awareness within your sphere of influence. Long-term community building. Sustainable support systems. Build support systems that can evolve and adapt over time, rather than depending on specific individuals or groups that may change. Develop multiple sources of support, including professional help, peer relationships, family connections, and community involvement. Create routines and practices that maintain community connection even during busy periods or life transitions. Contribute to support systems for others, as well as receiving support to create reciprocal relationships that benefit everyone involved. Regularly evaluate and adjust support systems to ensure they continue meeting your needs as you grow and change. Mentoring others. As your recovery progresses, Consider mentoring others who are beginning their own perfectionism recovery journeys. Share practical strategies and experiences while being careful not to give advice beyond your expertise or training. Provide encouragement and hope while being honest about the challenges involved in changing perfectionist patterns. Model healthy boundaries by offering support without taking responsibility for others' recovery outcomes. Helping others also supports your own recovery by reinforcing healthy thinking patterns and providing meaning beyond personal achievement. Chapter 9. Advanced Recovery Strategies. Working with Perfectionist Triggers. Identifying your unique triggers. Every individual has specific situations, thoughts, and emotions that activate their perfectionist responses. Identifying these triggers is essential for preventing perfectionist spirals. Common triggers include deadlines at work, social media browsing, family gatherings, public speaking, criticism or feedback, and starting new projects or relationships. Keep a trigger journal, noting when perfectionist thinking intensifies. What situations preceded these episodes? What thoughts or emotions were present? Notice patterns in timing, such as triggers being stronger during stressful periods, hormonal changes, or anniversary dates of significant events. Physical triggers might include fatigue, hunger, illness, or certain environments that increase vulnerability to perfectionist thinking. Developing trigger management plans. Once you identify your triggers, create specific plans for managing these situations before they occur, rather than trying to cope in the moment. For work deadlines, plan realistic timelines, build in buffer time, and practice self-compassion statements for when things do not go perfectly according to schedule. For social media triggers, set specific time limits. Curate feeds to reduce comparison content and practice reality checking when viewing others' posts. For family triggers, prepare boundaries, compassionate responses to criticism, and self-care plans for before, during, and after family interactions. Practice trigger management plans during calm periods, so the strategies become automatic when triggers actually occur. Advanced mindfulness techniques. Mindful observation of perfectionist thoughts. Instead of immediately fighting or believing perfectionist thoughts, practice observing them with curiosity and detachment. Notice the specific words and phrases your perfectionist mind uses. Does it sound like a particular person from your past? What tone does it use? Observe how perfectionist thoughts affect your body. Do you feel tension, anxiety, or other physical sensations when these thoughts arise? Practice thanking your mind for trying to protect you while recognizing that perfectionist thoughts are not facts or necessary instructions. Mindfulness of perfectionist emotions. Perfectionist emotions like anxiety, shame, and disappointment can be overwhelming, but mindfulness practice helps create space around these feelings. Notice where perfectionist emotions show up in your body. Anxiety might create chest tightness, while shame might feel like stomach heaviness. Practice breathing with perfectionist emotions rather than trying to eliminate them immediately. They are temporary experiences that will pass naturally. Use loving-kindness meditation to send compassion to yourself when experiencing perfectionist emotions, rather than adding self-criticism to the discomfort. Present moment awareness. Perfectionist thinking focuses on past mistakes or future failures, rarely staying present with current reality where most of life actually happens. Practice regular present moment check-ins throughout the day. What is actually happening right now versus what your mind is worried about? Use sensory awareness to anchor yourself in present experience. What do you see, hear, smell, taste, or feel physically in this moment? Recognize that this present moment does not require perfect performance. You can be imperfect right now, and everything is still okay. Dealing with perfectionist relationships. Setting boundaries with perfectionist demands. Other people may have become accustomed to your perfectionist over-functioning and resist changes that require them to take more responsibility. Clearly communicate new boundaries about what you will and will not do to maintain others' comfort or meet their perfectionist expectations. Expect pushback when you stop over-functioning. People may express disappointment, criticism, or attempts to guilt you back into perfectionist behaviors. Stay consistent with boundaries even when others are unhappy. Their discomfort with change does not mean you should return to perfectionist patterns. Prepare supportive responses to boundary violations, such as, "I understand you are disappointed, and I am not going to change my decision." Helping others without enabling. You may want to help friends or family members who struggle with perfectionism, but avoid taking responsibility for their recovery or enabling their perfectionist behaviors. Share your own experiences and resources when appropriate, but avoid giving advice or trying to fix their perfectionism. Refuse to participate in perfectionist behaviors, such as excessive planning, critiquing their work, or providing constant reassurance about their performance. Model healthy achievement and self-compassion without preaching or trying to convince them to change their approaches. Support their recovery efforts when they ask for help, while respecting their autonomy to make their own choices about change. Building authentically intimate relationships. Perfectionist relationships are based on performance and image management. Authentic intimacy requires vulnerability and showing your imperfections to others. Practice sharing appropriate struggles, fears, and mistakes with trusted individuals. Start small and increase vulnerability as relationships prove safe. Accept that some relationships may not survive increased authenticity. People who only accepted your perfect facade were not truly intimate relationships anyway. Seek relationships with people who demonstrate their own authenticity and vulnerability, rather than maintaining perfect appearances. Appreciate friends and partners who love you despite knowing your flaws, rather than those who only see your perfect presentations. Advanced cognitive techniques. Metacognitive awareness. Develop awareness of your thinking patterns themselves rather than just individual thoughts. Notice when you are thinking in perfectionist ways. Recognize the difference between problem-solving thinking and perfectionist rumination. Problem-solving leads to action, while rumination creates more anxiety without solutions. Notice perfectionist thinking traps, such as all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, or mind reading, and label them as they arise. Practice stepping back from your thoughts to observe them objectively, rather than being completely identified with them. Values-based decision-making. Make decisions based on your core values, rather than perfectionist fears or external expectations about what you should do. Clarify your values in different life areas, such as relationships, work, health, creativity, and contribution. What matters most to you beyond achieving perfection? When facing decisions, ask which choice aligns with your values, rather than which choice seems more perfect or less risky. Accept that values-based decisions sometimes lead to imperfect outcomes, but create more authentic and satisfying life experiences. Regularly review and update your values as you grow and change, rather than assuming they remain static throughout your life. Cognitive flexibility training practice. Thinking in multiple ways about situations, rather than defaulting to perfectionist interpretations of events. For any challenging situation, generate at least 3 different ways to understand what happened, rather than accepting the first perfectionist explanation. Practice perspective-taking by considering how others might view situations differently than your perfectionist interpretations. Develop comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity, rather than needing to know the perfect explanation or solution for every situation. Challenge yourself to find positive or neutral aspects of situations that your perfectionist mind initially interprets completely negatively. Lifestyle design for recovery. Creating recovery. Supportive environments. Design your physical and social environments to support recovery, rather than triggering perfectionist behaviors. Remove or reduce perfectionist triggers in your home, such as excessive mirrors, perfectionist inspiration quotes, or comparison-inducing materials. Create spaces that feel calming and accepting, rather than demanding perfect organization or appearance. Surround yourself with reminders of your recovery goals, such as self-compassion, quotes, books about authenticity, or photos of meaningful relationships. Choose activities and hobbies that emphasize enjoyment and learning, rather than perfect performance or competition with others. Time management. Without perfectionism. Develop time management approaches that support sustainable productivity rather than perfectionist overscheduling and burnout. Build buffer time into schedules to account for realistic human limitations and unexpected events, rather than planning perfect efficiency. Practice saying no to commitments that would require perfectionist performance or sacrifice of self-care and recovery priorities. Allow time for rest, recreation, and spontaneity, rather than scheduling every moment for productive, achievement-oriented activities. Accept that you cannot do everything perfectly, and choose priorities based on values, rather than trying to excel in every area simultaneously. Energy management for sustainable recovery. Recognize that perfectionism recovery requires mental and emotional energy. Protect and replenish your energy resources rather than depleting them through overcommitment. Activities and relationships energize you versus those that drain you. Prioritize energy-giving experiences during recovery. Practice regular self-care that goes beyond basic survival, needs to include activities that bring joy, creativity, and connection. Set boundaries around energy-draining people and situations while building supportive relationships and environments. Remember that energy management is not selfish, but necessary for maintaining the capacity to continue growing and contributing authentically. Chapter 10. Long-term maintenance and growth. Understanding the recovery journey. Phases of perfectionism. Recovery. Recovery from perfectionism follows predictable phases, though individuals may move through them at different rates and may revisit earlier phases during stressful periods. Initial awareness phase involves recognizing perfectionist patterns and understanding how they impact your life. This phase often includes relief at finally understanding long-time struggles. Skill-building phase focuses on learning and practicing new ways of thinking and behaving. This phase requires significant effort and may feel uncomfortable as old patterns are challenged. Integration phase involves making new approaches automatic and natural, rather than forced or conscious. Healthy patterns become habitual during this phase. Maintenance phase requires ongoing attention to prevent relapse while continuing to grow and refine recovery skills throughout life. Advanced recovery involves helping others while continuing your own growth and addressing deeper layers of perfectionist conditioning. Realistic timeline expectations. Complete recovery from deeply ingrained perfectionism takes years, not months. Setting realistic expectations prevents discouragement when change does not happen immediately. Early changes in awareness and occasional use of new skills may happen within weeks or months of beginning recovery work. Consistent use of recovery skills and noticeable improvement in daily life typically develops over 6 months to 2 years of regular practice. Automatic healthy responses and significant reduction in perfectionist distress usually require 2 to 5 years of sustained recovery effort. Advanced recovery and ability to help others typically develops after 5 or more years, though some individuals may reach this stage sooner. Remember that recovery is not linear. You may experience setbacks, periods of rapid progress, and times when change feels slow or stalled. Common recovery challenges. Perfectionist recovery. Perfectionism. Many people approach perfectionism recovery with perfectionist expectations, creating new sources of self-criticism and frustration. You may expect to implement recovery strategies perfectly, never have perfectionist thoughts again, or progress faster than realistically possible. Notice when you are being perfectionist about your recovery and apply self-compassion to this struggle just as you would to any other perfectionist pattern. Recovery itself is an imperfect process that includes setbacks, mistakes, and times when you forget to use your skills. Family and social resistance. People in your life may resist changes that threaten familiar dynamics, or require them to take more responsibility when you stop over-functioning. Family members may criticize your recovery efforts, especially if they also struggle with perfectionism or depend on your perfectionist behaviors. Friends may feel uncomfortable with increased authenticity if your relationships were based primarily on shared perfectionist values or competition. Workplace cultures may reward perfectionist behaviors, making it challenging to maintain recovery while meeting professional expectations. Prepare for this resistance by building supportive relationships and expecting that some existing relationships may change or end. Perfectionist relapse. Triggers. Certain life circumstances increase vulnerability to perfectionist relapse, including major stress transitions, illness, and significant losses. High stress periods may temporarily overwhelm your recovery skills, making perfectionist patterns feel necessary for survival. Life transitions, such as job changes, moves, relationship changes, or health issues, may trigger old perfectionist coping mechanisms. Anniversary dates of traumatic events or major failures may reactivate perfectionist thinking even after years of recovery. Economic insecurity, health problems, or family crises may make perfectionist control attempts feel urgent and necessary. Relapse. Prevention and management. Developing early warning systems. Learn to recognize the early signs that perfectionist thinking is returning before it becomes overwhelming or leads to major setbacks. Physical warning signs might include increased tension, headaches, sleep problems, appetite changes, or return of stress-related symptoms. Emotional warning signs include increased anxiety about performance, irritability when things are not perfect, or shame about normal mistakes. Behavioral warning signs include procrastination over preparation, avoidance of challenges, or increased criticism of yourself and others. Cognitive warning signs include all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing about mistakes, or obsessive worry about outcomes. Social warning signs include withdrawal from relationships, increased conflict with others, or difficulty accepting help and support. Emergency recovery plans. Create specific plans for managing perfectionist episodes before they occur, so you have clear steps to follow when thinking is compromised. Include immediate self-care strategies, such as breathing exercises, calling supportive friends, or engaging in calming activities. Have a list of recovery reminders, such as key insights from therapy, self-compassion phrases, or evidence that contradicts perfectionist beliefs. Plan to increase professional support during difficult periods by scheduling extra therapy sessions or attending support group meetings. Identify trusted individuals who can provide perspective and support when you are caught in perfectionist thinking patterns. Include plans for modifying responsibilities and expectations during recovery periods rather than trying to maintain normal performance levels. Learning from setbacks. Treat perfectionist relapses as learning opportunities rather than evidence of recovery failure or personal inadequacy. Analyze what factors contributed to the setback without self-judgment. What stressors were present? Which recovery skills did you forget to use? Identify what helped you recognize the setback and begin recovery. What resources or strategies were most effective in managing the episode? Adjust your recovery plan based on what you learned. Do you need additional skills, stronger support systems, or better stress management? Remember that setbacks are normal parts of recovery, not signs that you are not making progress or that recovery is impossible. Use setback experiences to increase compassion for others who struggle with perfectionism and to deepen your understanding of recovery challenges. Continued growth and development. Deepening self-compassion. Practice. Self-compassion is not a skill you master once, but a lifelong practice that deepens and expands over time. Regular self-compassion meditation practice helps maintain the emotional foundation needed for ongoing perfectionism recovery. Expand self-compassion beyond personal mistakes to include compassion for your history struggles, limitations, and human imperfections. Practice self-compassion in increasingly challenging situations as your capacity for self-kindness grows stronger. Extend compassion to the parts of yourself that developed perfectionism as protection, rather than judging your perfectionist history. Learn to offer yourself the same patience and understanding you would give a beloved friend facing similar challenges. Values, clarification, and evolution. Your core values may evolve as you recover from perfectionism and discover authentic desires beneath perfectionist conditioning. Regularly reassess whether your current goals and activities align with your deepest values rather than perfectionist expectations. Allow your values to change as you grow and learn more about yourself, rather than feeling obligated to maintain consistency with past priorities. Make major life decisions based on authentic values rather than what seems impressive, successful, or perfect to others. Create space in your life for exploring new interests and possibilities that may not fit your previous perfectionist identity. Developing authenticity. Authenticity involves knowing and expressing your true thoughts, feelings, values, and desires, rather than performing roles that seem perfect. Practice increasing honesty in relationships about your real experiences rather than maintaining perfect facades. Allow yourself to have and express preferences, opinions, and boundaries even when they may disappoint or conflict with others. Develop comfort with being disliked or criticized for authentic choices, rather than people-pleasing to maintain perfect approval. Express creativity and interests that bring you joy rather than only pursuing activities that produce impressive results. Contributing to others. Recovery. Sharing your story appropriately. Your recovery story can provide hope and guidance for others struggling with perfectionism when shared thoughtfully and appropriately. Consider speaking at support groups, writing about your experiences, or mentoring individuals beginning their own recovery journeys. Share both struggles and successes to provide realistic hope rather than creating new perfectionist standards for recovery. Focus on what helped you, rather than giving advice about what others should do, since recovery paths vary significantly between individuals. Respect others. Autonomy and readiness for change, rather than trying to convince or pressure them to pursue recovery. Supporting family members. If family members also struggle with perfectionism, your recovery can model healthier approaches while respecting their choices about change. Avoid preaching about perfectionism recovery or trying to fix family members who have not asked for help. Set healthy boundaries around family perfectionist behaviors while maintaining loving connections when possible. Create family interactions based on acceptance and connection rather than performance and achievement. Model self-compassion and healthy achievement for children and other family members without explicitly teaching or demanding these approaches. Professional and community contributions. Consider how your perfectionism recovery experience might inform your professional work or community involvement. You might advocate for mental health awareness, workplace wellness programs, or educational approaches that prevent perfectionism development. Share recovery insights through writing, speaking, teaching, or other professional activities that align with your skills and interests. Support organizations and causes that promote mental health, self-acceptance, and alternatives to perfectionist culture. Use your professional skills and platforms to challenge perfectionist messages and promote more balanced approaches to achievement and success. Maintaining long-term recovery. Creating sustainable practices. Long-term perfectionism recovery requires sustainable daily practices rather than intensive efforts that lead to burnout. Develop simple, consistent practices such as brief morning self-compassion, check-ins, or evening gratitude and self-forgiveness routines. Integrate recovery practices into existing daily activities rather than adding multiple new requirements that create pressure and overwhelm. Adjust practices based on life circumstances while maintaining core elements that support your recovery. Focus on consistency over perfection in your recovery practices, allowing flexibility while maintaining regular attention to your mental health. Building recovery into life transitions. Major life transitions can either support continued recovery or trigger perfectionist relapses depending on how they are approached. Plan for transitions such as job changes, moves, relationship changes, or health issues by increasing support and reducing other pressures during adjustment periods. Use transitions as opportunities to implement recovery principles in new contexts rather than defaulting to perfectionist approaches in unfamiliar situations. Seek support during transitions from people who understand your recovery journey and can provide perspective when stress increases. Remember that transitions naturally involve uncertainty and imperfection, making them ideal opportunities to practice acceptance and self-compassion. Legacy and meaning. Consider how your perfectionism recovery contributes to larger purposes and meanings beyond personal well-being. Your recovery may inspire family members, colleagues, or community members to examine their own relationships with perfectionism and achievement. The authenticity, vulnerability, and self-compassion you practice contribute to cultural change toward more accepting and realistic human standards. Your professional work, personal relationships, and community involvement can all be expressions of recovery principles that benefit others. Recovery from perfectionism often leads to increased capacity for genuine contribution and service based on authentic values rather than perfectionist image management. Conclusion. Embracing the beautiful mess. The perfection trap finally broken. Thomas Curran's revolutionary research has exposed perfectionism as one of the greatest psychological threats of our time. But his work also provides the roadmap for freedom from this devastating trap. The evidence is overwhelming. Perfectionism does not create success, happiness, or fulfillment. Instead, it destroys mental health relationships and actual achievement while creating persistent suffering. But recovery is possible. Thousands of individuals have broken free from perfectionist prisons to build authentic, meaningful lives based on self-compassion, realistic standards, and genuine connection. Your new relationship with achievement. Recovery from perfectionism does not mean abandoning goals or accepting mediocrity. It means developing a healthy, sustainable relationship with achievement that enhances rather than destroys your well-being. Becomes a practice of continuous improvement rather than an impossible destination. You can pursue challenging goals while accepting that results include both successes and setbacks. Achievement becomes one aspect of a full life rather than the sole source of self-worth. You can value accomplishment while also appreciating relationships, creativity, rest, and simple existence. The ripple effects of your recovery. When you recover from perfectionism, you do not only heal yourself, your transformation creates positive changes for everyone in your life. Children who see adults practicing self-compassion learn that their worth does not depend on perfect performance. They develop resilience rather than perfectionist anxiety. Partners and friends experience more authentic relationships when you stop managing impressions and start sharing your real self, including imperfections. Colleagues benefit when you model sustainable work habits, realistic standards, and collaborative rather than competitive competitive approaches to shared goals. Your recovery contributes to cultural change by demonstrating alternatives to perfectionist achievement culture that dominates modern society. Living the beautiful mess. Life is inherently messy, uncertain, and imperfect. The attempt to create perfection within this reality is not only impossible, but prevents you from appreciating the beauty that exists within imperfection. Authentic relationships include misunderstandings, conflicts, and imperfect communications that get worked through over time, creating deeper intimacy than perfect facades ever could. Creative endeavors require experimenting with terrible ideas, producing mediocre work, and learning from failures that ultimately lead to breakthrough innovations. Personal growth happens through making mistakes, facing challenges, and gradually developing wisdom through imperfect experiences rather than perfect planning. The most meaningful life experiences often arise from unplanned moments, spontaneous connections, and imperfect situations that become treasured memories. Your recovery manifesto. As you continue this journey, remember these core principles that can guide you through any perfectionist temptation. Progress over perfection always. Small, imperfect steps create more achievement than waiting for perfect conditions or flawless execution. Self-compassion is non-negotiable. Treat yourself with the same kindness you would show a beloved friend facing similar challenges. Mistakes are data, not disasters. Every error provides valuable information about what to adjust or try differently, rather than evidence of personal failure. Good enough is usually good enough. Reserve perfectionist effort for truly important situations, rather than applying impossible standards to every life area. Connection matters more than impression. Authentic relationships based on genuine sharing create more satisfaction than maintaining perfect appearances. Your worth exists independent of performance. You deserve love, belonging, and happiness simply because you exist, not because you achieve perfectly. The invitation to freedom. Today, you have learned that perfectionism is not your friend. It is not helping you achieve more or become better. It is a psychological trap that creates suffering while preventing the very success it promises. But you have also learned that freedom is possible. Recovery requires effort, practice, and patience, but thousands of people have successfully broken free from perfectionism to build authentic, fulfilling lives. The choice is yours. Will you continue pursuing impossible perfectionist standards that guarantee suffering and limit your potential? Or will you embrace the vulnerability and courage required to live authentically? Your first imperfect step. Recovery begins with a single imperfect action. Choose one area where perfectionism has been holding you back, and take one small, messy step forward today. Send the email without rewriting it 5 more times. Start the project without waiting for perfect conditions. Share an authentic struggle with a trusted friend. Remember that this step does not need to be perfect. It just needs to be real, authentic, and moving you toward the life you actually want, rather than the perfect life that does not exist. Your recovered life is waiting. It will not be perfect, but it will be truly yours. And that is more than good enough. The complete science behind perfectionism, its devastating effects, and most importantly, the proven path to recovery and authentic living. Thomas Curran's research has given us the tools to break free from the perfectionism epidemic that is destroying so many lives. Now it is time to put this knowledge into action. Start immediately with one imperfect action. Do not wait for the perfect time or perfect understanding. Begin your recovery journey right now with whatever small step feels manageable. Share this information with someone who might be struggling with perfectionism. Your willingness to discuss these topics openly contributes to reducing shame and encouraging recovery. Seek professional help if perfectionism is significantly impacting your mental health, relationships, or life satisfaction. Recovery is easier with proper support and guidance. Comment below about which insights resonated most strongly with you. Share your perfectionist struggles or recovery victories to encourage others on similar journeys. Subscribe for more content about mental health, personal growth, and building authentic, meaningful lives in our perfectionist culture. Share this video with friends, family members, or colleagues who might benefit from understanding perfectionism and recovery possibilities. This is not the end of your perfectionism recovery journey. It is the beginning. The real work happens in your daily life as you practice self-compassion, challenge perfectionist thoughts, and choose authenticity over performance. Remember that recovery itself does not need to be perfect. You will have setbacks, difficult days, and times when you forget everything you have learned. This is normal and expected. What matters is that you keep returning to recovery principles and practices. Keep choosing self-compassion over self-criticism. Keep choosing authentic connection over perfect performance. Your imperfect, authentic life is waiting for you. Go live it beautifully, messily, and completely on your own terms. Thank you for joining this journey toward freedom from the perfection trap. Until next time, practice being perfectly imperfect, and remember that you are enough exactly as you are.